I read exactly 100 books in 2022, so let's rank them. Granted, a lot of them are manga and graphics, but 100 is still by far the largest number of books I've ever read in a year, and I haven't really discussed any of them on here, so I thought it'd be fun to do a year-end tier list ranking all of the books that I read in 2022. Now, when we get to the tier list, you'll see a discrepancy in the number of books that are on the tier list versus the 100 I just told you, so allow me to explain some of those. So I read 88 unique books this year, which means that I read 88 books and also reread 12 of those books, which gets us up to that 100. Of those 88 books, 76 of them were ones that I read for the first time this year, meaning that there were another 12 books that I reread in 2022 that I'd previously read in a different year prior. Those rereads are not going to be represented on this tier list. I'm just going to be going through the 76 unique first-time reads that I read this year, if that makes sense. And I actually already discussed a lot of those in a video I made earlier this year where I reread some books that I'd previously disliked or been underwhelmed by, so that will be linked up in the cards if you want to check that out. And then finally, on this tier list, I will be ranking each series I read this year as a whole. So any series that I read this year have been condensed into one slot on the tier list versus the 20 plus that some of them would otherwise be taking up. So as you'll see, I have 5 tiers on this tier list from top to bottom: new fave, great, good, a little forgettable, and not my fave. Now, although there are 5 tiers on this tier list, I don't want you to immediately think that these correlate to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, because I actually didn't give out any 1-star ratings this year. So yeah, obviously the new fave category will probably be my 5-star reads, but there will probably also be some high 4 out of 5s that end up there as well. This is also a good opportunity for me to reevaluate some of the ratings I gave this year, and if something ends up in like not my fave and I'm like, you know what, maybe I do need to bump it down to a 1. Who knows? We'll see. Enough rambling, let's jump in. So since I've grouped series together, actually the first read of the year is not in the first position where it should be. Actually, my first read of the year were the first 6 volumes of 20th Century Boy by Naoki Urasawa, but since I didn't finish the series until the end of the year, that's when we're going to get to it. So we're actually going to be starting with the first 2 volumes of Platinum End. And ironically, the first book of the year, the first thing that's going into the tier list, is my least favorite thing that I read this year. Surprise! So I only read volumes 1 and 2 of Platinum End this year, and there's a reason. I was not having a great time. Platinum End, I believe, is written and illustrated by the same people that wrote and illustrated Death Note, and it's got a premise that really intrigued me that seemed a little bit like Death Note, a little bit like Battle of Wits-esque. Also, the covers all look really cool. I love the art style, and I was just intrigued. I was interested, and unfortunately I was also underwhelmed. And the common sentiment seems to be that this is like Death Note but worse, and I think I agree with that. Okay, next up we've got Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. And this one's a little bit interesting because my gut says to put it in great, but I think it is my new favorite Poirot mystery, which theoretically would put it up into new fave because it is a new favorite. I think I am going to go ahead and put it into great because that's just what feels right. I think I ended up giving it a 4.5 out of 5, and I don't think it's quite good enough to get into the like overall new fave tier. It's a new favorite Agatha Christie, but not a new favorite book overall. I made a video where I read Death on the Nile and tried to figure out the mystery behind it. It's a long one, but it was one of my favorite videos I've ever recorded, so I will leave that up in the cards if you want to check it out. I had a lot of fun with it. I hope you will too. Next up is the Given manga series. Now, I believe I have read 6 volumes of this series. I read it online via fan translations, and I believe at the very least I read the 6 volumes that are out and published in English as of the time I was reading it. I might have read further, but I'm really not sure. The ones that I counted on Goodreads are the first 6. So we're just counting the ones that are out in English because those are the only ones I'm confident I have read. And I think this is going to go solidly into the good tier. I can't quite put it up into the great tier, but if I were going to put it elsewhere, it would be up in the great tier. Given is a BL manga that centers around this band, this new member who joins, and his past struggles, just deals with a lot of music. It's a fun time. I'm currently rereading it because the next volume is about to come out, and I binged the first 6 in like a 24-hour period, so I barely remember a lot of the story, which is why I feel I can only put it in good. But I enjoyed it. I had a fun time. I think they're all like 3-star reads for me. It was a little ridiculous at some points, and that's why it's not like something I totally loved, but I had a fun time. I'm rereading it. I quite liked it, and I'm excited for the next volume to come out. I'm not sure if I said this at the front of the video, but I am taking you chronologically through the year, and we will quickly discover how little I read in the first half of the year and how much I've been reading over the past several months. Because with The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, we are already at April into May. That said, I believe I'm going to put this tentatively up into the great tier. It's on the borderline between great and good, but I think it belongs in great. And I will be ranking these within the tier, and I do think it goes behind Death on the Nile. I would describe this book as kind of like a cozy sci-fi. Cozy fantasy is kind of becoming really popular right now, but this is a cozy sci-fi to me. It basically just follows this group of misfits who are a crew on a ship as they travel through space, and I believe they're trying to punch a hole somewhere. It's been a long time since I've read this, and honestly, the plot is the least important part of this story. It's mostly about the characters and their relationships with each other. And I'm a sucker for a cute found family story, and this was a really great one. I still haven't picked up any of the other books in the series. I'm not sure if I plan to because I know they're all companion stories, but at least this first one I really enjoyed. Next up, we have the omnibus of the Another manga. This is the manga adaptation of a novel by Yukito Ayatsuji, which I read back in 2020. Still haven't watched the anime, but it is on my list. And I think I'm gonna go ahead and put this into the good tier. It's close to the great tier, but I'm putting it in good. In fact, I think I'm going to move it ahead of Given. So I read the novel back in 2020 and I gave it 3 out of 5. I was going to give it 4 out of 5, but I did not like the ending, so it got bumped down. And I actually enjoyed the experience of reading the manga more than reading the novel, so I did enjoy the manga more, but not enough to bump it up much higher in my ratings than the novel. Next up, we've got The Psychology of Harry Potter, which I read also around that time. I think I'm actually going to put this in a little forgettable. I hate rating and reviewing nonfiction. I never know what rating to give it. I think I gave this one 3 out of 5. I liked it. I thought it was a really fascinating read because it's basically a series of psychological essays about the Harry Potter series and different facets of it. I found it really fascinating. That said, in this exact moment, could I tell you what any singular essay was about? No, I cannot. So I liked it, I enjoyed it, but it was a little forgettable, so I'm gonna go ahead and put it there. All right, so this is when the mass amounts of reading begin, because we're skipping forward from May to July with Heartstopper. Heartstopper is one of the things I reread this year. I read Heartstopper twice. They were both in July. They were 2 days apart. This is solidly going up into new fave. I didn't give any of the singular volumes 5 out of 5, but I did give the series as a whole 5 out of 5, so it is my first 5-star read of the year that you've seen so far. I had such a great time with Heartstopper this summer. I read all 4 volumes, I watched the TV show, I read the volumes again, I watched the TV show again. It was a great time. Honestly, I have to say, I think I prefer the show in many ways just because the coming together of the friend group happens so much quicker in the show, and that is what I really love about the story. So personally, I think I actually like the show more, but the first 2 volumes of Heartstopper are really good. I love them so much. 3 and 4 are also very good, but the first 2 just like really hooked me and made me fall in love with the series. It was definitely an obsession. It was one of those things that I really like hyper focused on for like 2 weeks straight, and I haven't thought about it much since then, but I did really, really love it. So it's a new fave. Moving on to my summer review, which currently is a 2-volume BL series. I'm very confused as to whether or not there will be more volumes. The story doesn't seem complete, but everywhere I've seen, it almost seems like this is it. Like, there was one and then it got a sequel and then that's it. I'm very confused. But anyway, I'm going to actually put this one in a little forgettable. I liked it, I enjoyed it, but I couldn't tell you the characters' names. And it was kind of just one of those things you read one time, you enjoy, and then you don't ever think about again. If another volume does come out, I'll definitely read it, but I don't know if that's happening or not. Next up, we've got Hyde by Kiersten White, and this is going into not my fave. I wanted to love this book so much because it has so many elements that I love. So the premise of this book is that our main character is invited to this game that supposedly is a test run for a reality show. They're going to be basically playing this big game of hide and seek in this abandoned amusement park, but then people start going missing and presumably dying. So this book has so many elements that I love. We've got a death game. We've got an abandoned amusement park. This book has one of the coolest end paper maps I have ever seen, but it was so underwhelming. Firstly, this is technically an adult novel, but it reads very much as a YA novel with shoehorned insta-love even thrown in there. The story also has a very strong moral narrative, one that I actually agree with, but it bashes you over the head so hard with it that it is impossible to enjoy it. It is done so clumsily. This is the type of book that I will read and be underwhelmed by, but not dislike it, and then eventually will lower the rating to 1 out of 5. So that might happen sometime in the future. Given the way I find myself talking about it right now, I feel like that will probably happen, but I did give it 2 out of 5. I didn't have a terrible time reading it. I just didn't think it was well done. Next up is Good Game Well Played, and this is going directly into a little forgettable. This is a graphic novel that tells the story of this group of friends from back, I believe, in the 90s and then present day, and their friendship dynamic and some of the struggles they go through. This story is perfectly fine. It's a really quick read. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I just basically nearly forgot that I read it this year. It did not stick with me at all. Next up, we've got The Midnight Library. I think it has to go in a little forgettable, but at the top of a little forgettable. The Midnight Library is a story about a woman who gets the opportunity to see what her life would be like if she made different decisions, if she lived in different universes, and it shows her journey through those different universes. I overall liked The Midnight Library. It definitely got an emotional response out of me, but there were also some things about it that I didn't totally love. I thought that there were some issues with the representation of mental health in the story, honestly, and I know that sounds weird because the author is, I believe, a therapist, but there were some things in there that I did not love how they were handled. I didn't think it was like grossly mishandled or anything. There were just some things that didn't quite sit right with me, and I couldn't bring myself to give it a higher rating because of that. And I won't go into it right now because of spoilers, but I think I mentioned it in my review on Goodreads. Next up is Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and I think I'm going to put this one at the end of the good tier. Before the Coffee Gets Cold is a collection of 4 short stories that all center around this cafe, and there are some magical time travel-y things happening in this cafe, and a lot of the stories are just very touching and emotional. So I'm not a novella girly. I have never really been into shorter stories. I like series and I like long books that give me a lot of time to really get invested in characters and stories. And I think that's why I didn't fall in love with this book as much as a lot of people have. So overall, I didn't totally fall in love with this one, but I did really like it. Future Kristen here. Somewhere in the process of moving files, the next section of the tier list went missing. So we're gonna re-record it now. It kind of sucks that this is the section that went missing because this is the best section of the list, and now I need to get my enthusiasm back up about Station 11, which is our second book that's going into the new fave category. I cannot believe I got this book from Book Outlet, allowed it to sit on my shelves for years, and then unhauled it before finally picking it up again and reading it this year and falling in love with it. So this is one of those books where I'm really appreciative for Storygraph's ratings that go by 0.25, because this is a very clear example of a 4.75 for me, which gets rounded up to 5 for Goodreads. I couldn't quite commit to giving it the 5 out of 5, but it was absolutely fantastic. So this follows several different perspectives centering around this virus that breaks out and the timelines before, during, and after this virus. As we know, I'm a sucker for different character plots weaving together, different timelines weaving together, and this is a prime example of both of those things. Moving on to the next book, which is Over My Dead Body, and this one, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to put in a little forgettable, and I think it's gonna go right here near the end of A Little Forgettable. This is a witchy graphic novel that takes place at a magical boarding school, which sounded fantastic. I saw the artwork and I was sold and immediately had to pick it up. Unfortunately, this graphic novel is basically just all vibes. The artwork is beautiful. It's one of my favorite art styles I've seen in a graphic format. But the story to me was very generic. There wasn't anything about it that I found super compelling or interesting or unique. If you're looking for a graphic novel that has like a witchy, autumn, dark academia vibe, this might be for you, as long as you go into it knowing that it's not going to be the most fantastic story ever. Because I will reiterate, the vibes and the artwork are fantastic. It just didn't grab me story-wise. Next up is another graphic novel that I read, I think the same day, and that is Crumbs. And unfortunately, I'm also going to be putting it in A Little Forgettable, although I'm gonna put it right here, a couple spots higher. Crumbs is a cozy fantasy graphic novel centering around these two main characters whose names I don't remember, which is why they end up in A Little Forgettable. This guy's family owns a bakery, and this girl is a witch who is studying, I believe, to be in this like government kind of job, but it's more like a scientific researchy sector of the government. And the story is about them and their romance and this cafe that his family has and her aspirations for this job. This is a really cute story. I would call it like a cozy romance fantasy, and I enjoyed it, but it was, as I said, a little forgettable. I can't even remember the characters' names, but I did definitely enjoy it. Next up is Semantic Error, and like the two before it, it's also going in A Little Forgettable. I think I'm gonna put it somewhere in here, maybe right here. This is an Enemies to Lovers BL webcomic. When I read seasons 1 and 2, which were the only ones out at the time. I believe season 3 is currently coming out. I'd heard about it for a long time. Honestly, I didn't really mean to read the whole thing. I kind of just started reading it, looking through it, and suddenly I had binged the whole thing in one day. And then I proceeded to forget it even existed because I didn't add it to my Goodreads until like a few days before the end of the year when I remembered that I read it. I couldn't tell you the main characters' names. I didn't totally love the dynamic between the two main characters. I thought that the Enemies to Lovers was like a bit too much enemy. I liked it when I read it, but it certainly has not stuck with me at all. Next up, we have The Final Gambit, which I will grudgingly, very grudgingly, put into good. Probably right there in good. This is the third and final book of the Inheritance Games trilogy. I reread books 1 and 2 in the lead up to this third book coming out this year. So I gave the first 2 books in the trilogy 4 out of 5. I think quality wise, they're more of a 3 out of 5, but I quite enjoyed them, so I bumped them up. This one got a 3 out of 5 because I think it is almost entirely irrelevant to the story. The story would have been better told condensed into a duology. I think that a lot of the things that happen in this book are unnecessary, but it concluded the trilogy and I enjoyed reading it, even though I thought that it was a little bit pointless. Also, no spoilers, but I had to chuckle at how many people were so loudly incorrect about the end of the romance plot in this trilogy. Like, so many people were so confident and were so wrong. And I don't understand where they got that opinion from, because I thought it was very clear where it was going the whole time, and I guess some other people did not. Also, I don't know why everyone's fighting over here about whether Jameson or Grayson is better. The answer is Xander. Xander is the best Hawthorne brother, the end. Next up, The Charm Offensive, and we're back on an upswing because this is going into great, and it's going at the very front of great. The Charm Offensive is a romance novel that centers around this TV show that is like The Bachelor in the sense that our main character, Charlie, has to go on the show, date women, choose one at the end, except he ends up starting to fall for his producer instead of any of the women on the show. Although I am not a Bachelor viewer, I am an avid consumer of reality TV, so the second I heard that premise, I was sold. I knew I had to read it. I knew I would love it. And I did. There were certainly a few things about it that I didn't totally love, which is why it's in great and not in a new fave. It was a 4.5 out of 5, but overall, I really enjoyed it. I had a fun time with it. It was great. Continuing the upswing, next up is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, which is also going up into the great tier right behind The Charm Offensive. I got a ton of ads for this on Instagram and I was sold on the premise alone because it had If We Were Villains vibes, which always intrigues me. In this story, there's a group of friends who went to college together. One of them was murdered while they were in college, and one of them was blamed for that murder. And now they're getting back together years later at homecoming and starting to unravel some of the secrets surrounding their friend's death. I don't have too much to say about this one. Obviously, I didn't love it quite as much as If We Were Villains because it did only end up in the great tier. I think I gave it 4 out of 5. But if you're looking for a dark academia story like this, if you liked If We Were Villains, I would definitely recommend this one because it was a really great read. We're on a roll because next is Ace of Spades, and that is going directly between the last two in the great tier. Clearly I was in a dark academia mood in the fall, which I think we're in October right now. Ace of Spades follows our two main characters, Devon and Chiamaka, who are entering their senior year at this elite private school. At the start of their senior year, someone calling themselves the Ace of Spades starts sending out these text messages that are revealing secrets about them and basically like threatening them and blackmailing them in many ways. So they're trying to figure out what is happening and why they're being targeted. I'm trying to say this in a way that avoids spoilers, but this is one of those books where like it always feels like things can't get worse and then things somehow manage to get worse. And so it just has this overwhelming sense of dread that builds throughout the novel. And overall, I found it to be a really compelling read and a really interesting mystery. There were a couple things about it that I thought could have been done a little bit better, but overall, I thought it was really great. Next up is The Ivies, which unfortunately for me was a like high school dark academia novel that I felt was not quite executed as well. And it is going into not my fave. For me, my biggest complaint about The Ivies is just that it read as like the stereotype of a generic YA novel to me. There were definitely some elements of it that ended up being a little bit surprising and I appreciated that, but overall there wasn't enough about it that felt special and unique for me to fully enjoy it, especially right after reading 2 dark academia novels that I thought were really well done and really enjoyed. In comparison, The Ivies was just generic to me, and that's why it ended up being not my fave. We're finally here. This is one of the main reasons I was so frustrated that this was the section of the footage that went missing, because this is the section where we get to talk about the best book I read this year, one of my new favorite books of all time. It's The Starless Sea, which quite obviously is going directly up into the new fave tier at the very front of it. The Starless Sea is one of those books that's very hard to describe the premise of, but I'll give it a go. The Starless Sea is a fairy tale-like mystery in which our main character, Zachary, discovers this book in a library, and when he begins to read it, he realizes that one of the stories within the book is about him. It is a story about something that happened to him when he was a child. And the discovery of this book and this story sends him on this wild adventure and mystery that is so fantastic. Like I said, this book is very fairy tale-like. In many ways, I would put it in the cozy fantasy category. Like I said, a lot of this book feels very fairy tale-like. A lot of the stories woven into the main plot feel like fairy tales. The main plot itself often reads like a fairy tale. I would personally put this in the cozy fantasy category. There's just so much about this book and its writing that is so beautiful and lyrical and whimsical, and I am obsessed with it. A few years ago when I first read If We Were Villains, I fell in love with it. It got me reading so much dark academia. It made me fall in love with that genre. And I'm very confident that this is what The Starless Sea is about to do for me, because I have since added so many cozy fantasies to my TBR just because I loved this book so much. And on that topic, you will see that the next book on this tier list is The Night Circus, also by Erin Morgenstern, because I read The Starless Sea and I was like, I need more, I must have more. So I immediately read The Night Circus and I also fell in love with it. And it also is going in the new fave tier, although at the end. Like Station 11, this is another one that is a 4.75, rounding up to 5 for me. I absolutely loved it. It had a lot of the same magic and whimsy and lyricism as The Starless Sea, but I didn't quite fall in love with it as much as The Starless Sea. The Night Circus had been on my radar for years and years. I think the fact that it is a historical fiction and also a romance is what kind of kept me from picking it up, even though there's a game element and I love a game element. But yeah, I also absolutely fell in love with The Night Circus. It's another one where the way that the plots weave together is just done so fantastically. I love the different timelines. I love the whimsy, the magic. It was fantastic. Let me tell you, there is no worse feeling than reading 2 books by an author, absolutely falling in love with their writing and both of the books individually, and then coming to the stark realization that that's it. They have not published anything else, and I am just sat waiting for whatever she decides to publish next. Like, consciously, logically, I knew these were the only 2 books she had published. But that realization really hurt when I fell in love with both of them and didn't have anything else by her to read. So I will absolutely be eagerly awaiting whatever she decides to publish next, because these 2 books are absolutely fantastic and are new favorites, especially The Starless Sea, which has in many ways taken over my life. And I believe finally, before I turn it back over to Past Kristen, our final one is The Woman in the Library, which I read after reading The Starless Sea and The Night Circus because, you know, The Starless Sea is a book about books and I could use another book about books. Unfortunately, this did not end up being it. And where it is ending up is down in the not my fave tier. So upon discovery that The Woman in the Library was a book within a book, I got really excited because it seemed like such a cool premise. Because essentially the story within a story is about these 4 characters who meet at the reading room at the Boston Public Library. Someone is murdered there and they are brought together via this murder. But there's also an outer layer where the author of this story and another author are conversing about the story itself. I was so intrigued, I was so here for it. But the book within a book element in here was done so poorly. At first, it was super intriguing, but past a certain point, it completely lost steam and was rendered completely irrelevant to the overall story. There were so many other things that could have been done with this book within a book element that just didn't happen, and it was really, really disappointing. And then on top of that, the story at the center of the whole book was just not interesting enough to keep me interested. And honestly, it was another one of those books where it's technically supposed to be an adult novel, but it read like a YA novel. Overall, this book had so much potential, but it just squandered every single ounce of it and ended up being so underwhelming and disappointing, which is why it was not my fave. All right, enough from me. Back over to Past Kristen for the rest of the tier list. Hi, it's me again. Pretty sure this video is cursed because there are actually 2 more books whose clips got deleted, so we're just gonna do those really quickly and move on. The first of these 2 is The Test, and I am putting that at the beginning of A Little Forgettable. So here's the thing. I actually have not given this a rating. It's a novella, and we've kind of already established I'm not a novella girly. I don't really trust myself to rate novellas because I'm always probably going to give them a lower rating than they actually deserve. In this novella, a man is taking a citizenship test and some weird stuff starts happening during that test. It was a quick read and I definitely don't have anything negative to say about it. I liked it, but I just don't really have much to say about it in general. I really should not be reviewing novellas, so It's a little forgettable for me, but that should not sway you in any way, shape, or form as to whether to read this. This next one is a really interesting one, and I'm disappointed the footage for this one went missing because I feel like I had some intelligent things to say in the first record, and now I'm a little mush brain. But this next one is A Lesson in Vengeance, and this one took me on a roller coaster, but it also took itself into the not my fave tier, and I do believe I'm going to be putting it between The Ivies and The Woman in the Library. I'm honestly not sure how to talk about this book. A Lesson in Vengeance is a dark academia novel set at a private boarding school, and the house that our main character is staying in is supposedly haunted by witches that lived there and died there several centuries ago. And kind of the central question to the entire novel is the magic real? Were they actually witches? This one is kind of like Over My Dead Body in that it nails the atmosphere. The autumnal dark academia witchy vibes are there. For a good majority of this book, I was actually fairly into the story apart from a few downsides. But then at a certain point, the book took a sharp turn and became something else entirely, and I did not enjoy that at all. There's also a certain character in this book where I'm really not sure what the reader is supposed to feel about them. I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but because of that, reading this book in many ways kind of felt like I was being gaslit the entire time, and it was not a great feeling. Like I said, I was really into it for a while, but the further into the book we got, the worse that got, and then the sharp turn at a certain point just completely lost me on the book. Okay, finally, officially, that is it for me. Now back to past Kristen on the first day that I recorded this video. Next up is Rules for Vanishing, which is gonna go into the great tier. I'm gonna put it right here ahead of Death on the Nile. This is another one where the second I heard the premise, I was sold. This is a horror YA novel that is about a dark game that happens when you step onto a road. There are obviously rules to this game as alluded in the title, and a group of friends goes onto this road to play this game to try and save one of their friends who went missing after supposedly playing this game herself. This one definitely nails the creepy vibes. It's very off-putting, it's very dark. I really enjoyed this one, and it's really intriguing to follow these characters as they continue on the road. I feel like this is a YA novel that people who like House of Leaves might enjoy because it has that same kind of like weird, off-putting quality to it, although obviously to me not quite as intricate as House of Leaves for obvious reasons. But it was really great. I really enjoyed it. Next up, I put them separately on this list, but I think I'm going to rank them together, and that is 20th Century Boys and 21st Century Boys by Naoki Urasawa. Where am I putting you, friend? Well, friend can go in the bin, but 20th Century Boys, does it go? I'm gonna put it here between The Starless Sea and Heartstopper. It's somewhere in this vicinity. And I'm gonna put 21st Century Boys just like right there with it. I kind of think this is just one thing. I probably should have just made it one entry on the list, but they are technically separate. So 20th Century Boys is a manga series by Naoki Urasawa, who is the author of Monster. The whole series is right here, just at the bottom of the frame. It's a mystery, paranormal, sci-fi series that centers around a group of friends. Nearing the new millennium in the late 90s, our main character, Kenji, starts discovering these weird things that are happening. He learns about this religious cult that is rising up, and the symbol that they're using looks like the symbol that he and his friends made up back in the 60s when they were kids. Kenji and his friends slowly start to realize that things are starting to happen, word for word verbatim, from this story that they made up when they were kids. It was this like sci-fi story about them saving the world from evil, and somehow this story is starting to play out in real life. And this religious cult, led by some mysterious person known only as Friend, seems to be at the center of all these weird things. So Kenji and his friends set out to try to figure out who this person is. Is it someone they knew when they were kids? And try to stop Friend before he brings on the end of the world. I started reading 20th Century Boys at the beginning of the year, then I kind of set it down, then I picked it up again, then I set it down again, and finally in December, I finished the series and 21st Century Boys. Several times throughout the year, I've referred to it as possibly my new favorite manga series ever, and I'm not sure that it can quite take over Death Note's reigning spot on that list, but I think it ties it. I'll be the first to say this is a 22-volume manga series plus the 2 in 21st Century Boys. It doesn't hit on all cylinders all the time. It is by no means a perfect series. There are many volumes that I would say are just okay, but the overall series I absolutely love. 20th Century Boys can also be broken down into 3 separate arcs throughout the series. The first arc I think is perfect. I think on its own, it could beat Death Note. The second arc is also very strong. It's the third arc where things start to get a little wonky and where I think it starts to lose some people. It didn't lose me. I didn't think it was the best ending to the series, but I enjoyed the entire series as a whole nonetheless. That said, if it ended with 20th Century Boys and we did not get 21st Century Boys, that might have lost me. 21st Century Boys at least wrapped up the story in a better way to me than 20th Century Boys did. But overall, it is such a cool, massive, massive mystery about cults and friendship, and it just is so, so, so good. These last 3 that I have to put on the list are the only 3 I haven't rated at all yet. So first of these, we have Sasaki and Miyano, which is an ongoing manga series. Currently in English, there are 6 volumes published, and in Japanese, there are 9 published. I read all 9 volumes near the end of December, and I think I'm actually going to put it maybe right here. I might put it ahead of The Charm Offensive, but I'm not totally sure on that. Actually, you know what? I think I am going to put it at the top of the great tier. I think that's where it belongs. In Sasaki and Miyano, Miyano is a BL fanboy. He loves reading BL manga, and one day when Sasaki asks about his manga, he lends one, and thus a friendship forms. And then of course they get wrapped up in their own BL storyline, which Miyano is willfully ignorant to, and Sasaki is trying to make happen as hard as he possibly can. I don't really have much to say about it. I just think it's really cute. I enjoy the characters. I enjoy the overall cast. I also really enjoyed the anime. I just think it's a really cute and fun time. Next up is Hirano and Kaguya, which is a spin-off of Sasaki and Miyano. And this one I believe I'm also gonna put in the great tier. But I'm not quite sure where. I think I'm going to tentatively place it at the end of the great tier solely because I feel like things haven't really gotten super warmed up yet. We're only 3 volumes in. Currently, there's only 1 volume of Hirano and Kaguya that is published in English, but there are 3 out in Japanese. I read all 3 via fan translations. We're only 3 volumes into the story, so pacing-wise, I feel like we're still warming up a bit. So that's why I put it at the end of great, because I'm not sure where all it's going. But so far, I'm enjoying where it's going. I actually like the relationship between Hirano and Kaguya better than the one between Sasaki and Miyano. So I'm really, really interested to see where their story goes. And finally, we're at the last one, and I hate to end this on a sour note, but the Danganronpa 2 manga is going somewhere in this not my fave tier. Dare I put it at the very bottom? Actually, I think I'm gonna put it at the top of the not my fave tier, because I can't do that to my favorite video game of all time. Also, I can never remember the full title of this manga. It is called Danganronpa 2: Ultimate Luck and Hope and Despair. Why do we need so many ands? So I've talked about it several times on here, but the Danganronpa video game franchise is my favorite franchise of all time. It is my favorite story of all time. I'm obsessed with it. I love it. And Danganronpa 2, the second game in the series, is my favorite video game, period. Which is why I am so mad at this manga adaptation. So firstly, it's not a pure manga adaptation. There is another manga series that is a pure manga adaptation, which I will be reading soon. But this one, complete in 3 volumes, is actually the story of the second game told from a different character's perspective. Kinda. Also, I read the first 2 volumes in 2022. I read the 3rd volume on the 1st of 2023. So volume 3 doesn't count toward the 100, but I'm discussing the series as a whole right now. I also had a lot of criticisms about this manga series, which is a pure adaptation of the first game, because it just is too much of a condensation of the story, and it's not a good way to tell the story at all. But this second one does that even worse because it relies on the reader's knowledge of the game to get across several things within the story. Like, it glosses over a lot of things that happen and just kind of assume the reader knows. So if someone who had never played the games decided to check out this Danganronpa manga, it's not going to end well for them because, firstly, the first one is messy, and then you get to the second one and half of it probably doesn't make sense to them because it's not from the actual main character's perspective and it relies on game knowledge. That said, since I have played the game and it is my favorite game, it was still a fairly enjoyable read because it gave some perspective on one of the other characters, but it is just not a good adaptation of Danganronpa at all. And since I didn't explain what Danganronpa, my favorite video game series, is about, allow me to explain. Danganronpa centers around Hope's Peak Academy, where students are invited every year if they are the best in their specific field. So there's someone like the super high school level baseball player, there's a pop star, there's a fan fiction writer, there's an actual novelist. But when these students show up at school for their first day, they get there, they pass out, they wake up in a classroom, and they discover that all ways of exiting have been blocked, and there's this stuffed teddy bear named Monokuma telling them that if they want to escape, they have to kill each other. It's a wild premise, I'm aware. It's a murder mystery visual novel / video game in which you're basically trying to solve murders and go through class trials to prove who did it. It's a great video game series. It is so well done. The second game in the series, the one that this stupid manga is based on, is the best one in the series. The manga is just not a good adaptation, and that's why it ends up in the not my fave category. And that, my friends, is the entire tier list. I've lost all my light. My camera gave out on me at one point, but we're still here. This also gives me a very clean top 5 for the year. The Starless Sea, 20th Century Boys, Heartstopper, Station 11, and The Night Circus, which I think is a fantastic recommendation list. I loved all these things this year. Those are my favorites. I'm not gonna drag this out any longer because this has probably already been very long. Thank you so much for watching. As always, links to all of my social media are down in the description, especially Goodreads and Twitter, which is where I'm most active. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you on there. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!